If Jedi Fallen Order and God of War Ragnarok weren't evidence enough, this game proves beyond all doubt that I am the worst parrier known to human existence. I can just never time that shit right. I quite liked the last game, Jedi Fallen Order, so I was looking forward to Jedi Survivor. And I gotta say, the game, for me, a bit of a mixed bag. First things first, the technical stuff. I understand that a lot of people, PC players especially, are not having the greatest experience with this game from a technical perspective. And I will say that I did not experience any game-breaking bugs or glitches, but I did have constant performance issues. I chose to play it on performance mode, and I would say about 80% of the time I was not getting 60 frames a second. And there were 1 or 2 times where textures would not load or render in time. The game director apparently refused to have another delay for this game. Why? Based on my experience playing Jedi Survivor, I would not call it a broken game, but it definitely was not a polished game. So just a quick note to the gaming studios out there. People don't mind games getting delayed because that means when they come out, there's a better chance of them being good, and in this case, a lot more polished and thus a lot more enjoyable. So that's the technical stuff out of the way. Getting into the actual game itself, it's a very familiar game in terms of the game design and also the story. It has all the stuff you remember from Jedi Fallen Order in terms of traversing the land, like running across the walls and jumping onto different surfaces, that Uncharted kind of exploration. And obviously the lightsaber combat in terms of the parrying and also blocking the laser blasts from stormtroopers with laser guns. And you've got some new lightsaber stances in this game. You have your double-bladed, your single-bladed. You can dual wield in this game, 2 lightsabers in one hand, that's cool. You have one where it's a lightsaber and a blaster in one hand. You also have the crossguard lightsaber, aka the Kylo Ren lightsaber, which absolutely shreds. You gotta be good at parrying to use that, which I of course am not. But I still managed to wreck a lot of stormtroopers with that thing, and it was quite satisfying to do so. And the game is by no means boring to play. It's just, I was really overcome with that sense of familiarity. I was just going through the areas, running across the walls, climbing up those surfaces, and I just couldn't help but think to myself, I feel like I've played this game before. Going back to that exploration for a second, please tell me that I'm not the only one this happened to and that I'm just not a complete idiot. But there were a few times where, say, I was running across a wall and then I jumped to the opposite wall and I would just fall to my death. Like the game just didn't register the fact that I jumped across to the other wall and didn't continue the run to the other side. Also, those things in the sky that you grapple onto and just zip through the cliff sides and through the skies with, loads of times I'd be doing that and you'd have to jump across and then like land on a grabbable surface. It would just not make the jump. Loads of instances like that where the exploration, the traversing just didn't work. But getting into the story and the narrative of the game, I also wasn't terribly impressed on that front either. Again, not necessarily a bad story, it's just the kind of plot that I've seen a number of times over in these kind of games, especially games that take place in pre-established fictional universes, where kind of like the main crux of it is the protagonist uncovering secrets that have been buried for centuries. And there's like underground temples and fortresses that have been long abandoned, you know, that whole feeling. And funnily enough, with all the Uncharted-esque exploration that you have in this game, the actual plot is also kind of reminiscent of an Uncharted game in the sense that there's this super secret, like kind of magical place that everyone's trying to get to, and it's a race against time to get to that place and its riches before the bad guys do. And that would have been really cool if the story was more compelling and the villain was more interesting. I didn't find myself really caring that much about the villain in this game. He is a Jedi who's been asleep for hundreds of years, and he turned against the Jedi Order because he felt like they turned against him. Now he's a bad Jedi. Never seen that before. I just didn't really care for the villain in the game. I found him kind of generic. And for the most part, the same for the story. Again, you're going along and you're following the trail, trying to find a way to get to this magical place that everyone's trying to get to, trying to stay one step ahead of the villain, trying to stop the villain from getting to that place first. And because of that generic storyline, I just wasn't really all that invested in the story until, I'd say, the last third, where it goes in a bit of a different direction. It takes a bit of a twist that I didn't see coming. And the last third or so of this game is by far the coolest part of the game story-wise. And in the latter half of this game, you get to those sections, the kind of sections you expect in these kind of games, where it just throws every single enemy type at you all at once, and you are trying to fight all sorts of different enemy types at the same time. Some of those areas I just cannot describe the frustration. Some of those areas of enemies are just tedious beyond belief. And some of the boss fights as well, oh my god. Just some of them are just so cheap in terms of the crap they do and trying to block and defend and parry. And I will fully admit, I did this in the last game and I did it in this game. A couple of times I did turn the difficulty down a little bit. I was playing the game mainly on Jedi Knight difficulty, kind of like the medium difficulty. And in some of those areas of enemies and some of the bosses, I did turn it down to Jedi Padawan. I'm not really used to these kind of games. You know, the parry type games, are they called Souls-like games? Does Jedi Survivor count as a Souls-like game? Feel free to correct me on that if I'm wrong. So yeah, Jedi Survivor, a game with a lot of frustration, a game with a lot of familiarity, a game with a lot of performance issues. But there is still some good stuff in there. There's some really good cutscenes. Again, the last third of the story I thought was really good, narratively speaking, and there's some character work in there that I actually quite liked. And for the most part, it is a fairly enjoyable game to play with the lightsabers, the force abilities, wiping out stormtroopers, fighting certain enemy types. It's also a really well designed game. In terms of the game design, the planets, the environments, it is a really good looking game. But it is one of those games that for me personally just couldn't fully overcome its familiarity in terms of the game design and the story and narrative. And I have absolutely no desire to go back and revisit some of those enemy areas and some of those boss fights anytime soon, if ever again.